Watch this.
He's supposed to be back in Idaho soon. So what will happen once Bryan Kohberger, the suspect in the murder of 4 University of Idaho students, lands in Latah County? As for what connected the suspected killer to the crime, there have been some sources claiming it was his own DNA. A renowned genetics expert happens to be right here in Boise, so we asked him about it. You know, nothing is getting done in Washington, D.C. You could say that's a running joke, but it's starting to get seriously ridiculous as House members try 6 times to pick the next speaker. Tried and failed. It's been about a week since investigators trying to solve the murder of 4 University of Idaho students narrowed down a suspect, tracked him down 2,500 miles away, and took him into custody 2 days later. Bryan Kohberger was arrested early Friday morning at his parents' home in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. And after sitting in the Monroe County Jail over the holiday weekend, Kohberger waived his extradition hearing yesterday. And this morning, he boarded a plane headed to Idaho. Today, members of the Moscow community and dozens of media outlets await his arrival at the Latah County Jail, and one of those is our own Morgan Romero. Morgan?
Brian, same story we've been telling you throughout the day. We are still waiting for the Moscow murder suspect, Bryan Kohberger, to arrive here in Moscow from Pennsylvania. We are expecting him to land at the Moscow Pullman Airport from an airplane later this evening. We also know, according to the Latah County Sheriff, that he will be here at this courthouse, which is the same building as the jail. He faces 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 felony count of burglary. We know when he arrives in Idaho, he will also be served with an arrest warrant. According to Idaho criminal rules, Kohberger has 24 hours from the time that he has served that arrest warrant to make an initial appearance in front of a magistrate judge in this judicial district in Latah County. We are also waiting on the probable cause affidavit, the PCA, to be unsealed in this case. The Latah County clerk told me today they don't typically unseal the PCA until they have the physical arrest warrant back in their possession and that arrest warrant has been served and returned. And typically, they get warrants back at the same time as that initial appearance I talked about. If and when the PCA is unsealed, police say we will learn details of this case and why investigators believe Kohberger is the one who committed these crimes. So again, that could potentially happen tomorrow, but important to note, judges have full discretion on whether to seal or unseal any court documents in their case. They also have full discretion over what happens inside their courtroom. For background, Kohberger is accused of stabbing 4 University of Idaho students to death at a house just off campus back on November 13th. This story making international headlines for the last 7 weeks. Authorities here said Ethan Chapin, Xana Kernodle, Madison Mogan, and Kaylee Gonsalves were all likely asleep at the time of the attack. When they went to arrest Kohberger at his family home in Pennsylvania early in the morning on December 30th last week, as Brian said, law enforcement broke several windows and doors as part of their tactical plan to get inside the home. Police say the FBI tracked Kohberger for several days leading up to his arrest, and they say he and his dad drove 2,500 miles from Pullman to Pennsylvania in a white Hyundai Elantra in mid-December. Kohberger was a student, a graduate student and a TA at Washington State University just across the border in Pullman, where he was studying criminology. At his court hearing in Monroe County yesterday, Kohberger waived his extradition rights. That means, as we've been covering, he willingly returned to the state of Idaho. Early this morning, we know he was transferred from Monroe County Jail to Pennsylvania State Police custody. That was confirmed from Monroe County Jail administrators. But when I asked whether he was on a plane headed to Idaho this morning, state police said they cannot provide more information or comment on his extradition status due to security reasons. However, we have been following a plane very closely at KTVB that is registered to Pennsylvania State Police. It's on a flight tracker site. That plane heading west from Scranton, Pennsylvania. At last check, just before this newscast, it was in Wyoming. It stopped a couple of times, apparently. However, we do not definitively know that Kohberger is on that specific plane. Once Kohberger gets here, the Latah County Sheriff says that they will evaluate him, and then after that evaluation by jail staff, they'll determine his housing classification. Earlier this week, Kohberger's extradition attorney in Pennsylvania, not his defense attorney, just the individual that was handling his extradition to Idaho, said, quote, his client is eager to be exonerated. But Brian, I talk about that probable cause affidavit because that is really where we will learn how and if Kohberger had any connections to any of the 4 victims in this case.
And that may be the only way we do find out any more information about this, because yesterday a magistrate judge issued a gag order in this case, right?
Yeah, a magistrate judge here in Latah County issued, it's called a non-dissemination order in formal terms, but really it's a gag order. Moscow police sent out a press release saying that they are no longer allowed to comment on this case, and that also applies to any and all law enforcement and investigators who have any information about this case, as well as attorneys or any parties representing the attorneys, so the defense attorney or the prosecuting attorney. So we will not be getting information from them. I will say I've reached out to the sheriff's office. I'm sure several other media outlets have reached out just about their plans for once Kohberger gets to this jail. And as I mentioned earlier, they sent out a press release saying what they're planning on doing. And I think they're giving sort of blanket statements. When I've talked to the Latah County clerk earlier, they're really speaking in general terms about what happens in felony cases versus speaking specifically about what's going to happen once Kohberger gets here. And again, Moscow police saying they can't comment, so we're not expecting to hear from them as well. That gag order is going to be in effect, the judge said, until a verdict is reached in this case, which is going to be potentially months from now.
Exactly. Okay, so a lot of people interested in this case, a lot of media, even some people in the community. Latah County Courthouse isn't a big courthouse. I think there's 3 courtrooms there. How's this going to play out tomorrow when he actually gets into court? It's going to be crowded.
It is going to be crowded. Again, if that hearing is tomorrow, which we are expecting it to be 24 hours after today, there is so much national media attention on this case, so much national media presence and local media presence here in Moscow. Just on the other side of this building, they've had to block off sidewalks because there's so many people. But in these courtrooms, very, very small, max occupancy, I'm told from the Latah County clerk, is about 75 people. And truly, the victims' families, the defendants' families, anybody interested in this that has a direct connection to this case is going to likely have reserved seating. And then there's going to be pooled cameras. We know there's going to be 2 pooled cameras for video recording as well as 1 still photography camera. And then we'll all have to share video from those cameras and photos from those cameras. And then media, public, first come, first served basis. So we're going to have to get here early in the morning, if it happens tomorrow, hours before the hearing itself in order to get a seat.
Yeah, I can't imagine you're going to want to be too far away from that courtroom when the things start to go down for tomorrow. Thank you very much, Morgan. I really appreciate that. Kind of lays things out of what will be happening over the next 24 hours or so. Thank you. Okay, so about that probable cause affidavit, it is still sealed. A PCA is supposed to lay out why law enforcement believes a suspect is guilty of a crime. This affidavit, we expect, will have exact details about why investigators were led to the 28-year-old criminology student from nearby Pullman, Washington. Possibly Kohberger's connection to the victims, how he pulled off the crime, why they think it was him, all those things should be included. And one of the biggest details may be how, after saying for so long they did not have a suspect in mind, how they made that link. Likely more than the car he drives, that white Hyundai Elantra. National news outlets claim they know about that connection, and they have for several days.
So many family members that we've spoken to so far say they are relieved that someone is behind bars. Law enforcement sources have been telling us that a big crack in this case came from DNA, specifically genetic genealogy. And so we'll be hearing a little bit more about that likely in that probable cause statement.
That was NBC's Gotti Schwartz from Monday, and that genetic genealogy, he said, was the big crack in the case, was something one of our viewers asked us about yesterday. Brian, could you delve into the DNA genealogy database used for the suspect at the U of I? Does the government now have genealogy info that previously was controlled by individuals and private organizations? And how accurate is this database? Well, to answer those 3 questions, it would require the knowledge of a DNA expert. And it just so happens we have one of those in our own backyard. With Dr. Greg Hampikian, terms like renowned and preeminent cannot be overstated. He got a degree in biology in 1982. He got a master's in genetics in 1986. He got a doctorate in genetics in 1990. He's been a board member of the Georgia Innocence Project since 2003. He started the Idaho Innocence Project in 2006, a year after he started teaching biological sciences at Boise State University. He's also the director of the Forensic Justice Project at BSU. He's a musician, a songwriter, a playwright. But back to that DNA expert stuff. Dr. Hampikian says he has used that expertise to help prove the innocence of wrongly convicted people around the country and around the world. Think Christopher Tapp in eastern Idaho and Amanda Knox in Italy. Normally in our backyard, today he's in Europe. But he took some time to speak with Andrew Bartline about the DNA forensic process and how it could have been used to solve this quadruple murder.
The crime labs are kind of behind the times. The genealogists have been doing this for more than a decade. The crime labs are just starting to do it.
Genetic genealogy, what is that exactly?
And so in this case, what it seems happened is they got some DNA, We don't know what from, maybe from an access point like a doorknob or a window. Once the DNA is sequenced, you can then take that file, just like a consumer would, to one of the genealogy sites that allows police to search public records of people who have opted in, saying, hey, if there's a murderer or a rapist in my family, I don't mind if you use my DNA to try to find them. I don't think it says exactly that, but there's an opt-in box. And enough people have done that, that if there is a Caucasian DNA sample, you have better than 70% chance of finding the family tree, last name, et cetera, of the person who left the DNA.
So if they don't get a hit in any of the, I guess, criminal databases of previously convicted criminals, they would then go to a commercial outlet where people would voluntarily submit their DNA to find out their own genealogy that way?
There is a company, Verigen, for example. I've worked with them, and they have a program for the police. It costs about $500 a file that the police want to say, hey, we have this file. There's no hit to the convicted offender database. We use the genealogy type of DNA. Here's the file. Can you send us relatives to this piece of evidence? Just like it was somebody looking for their long lost cousin. So after you get the genetic genealogy match, you get a buccal swab, a mouth swab from the person who is a suspect, and see if they match using traditional DNA methods. I imagine that in this case that they've probably already gotten that far through maybe a discarded cup or a cigarette butt or something like that. So they probably, for their probable cause, have already verified the match. But we'll see once it's unsealed.
I think a lot of people have this perception that DNA evidence is just a slam dunk land that we got the guy, but I guess through your work we've learned that that's not always the case.
The first time DNA evidence was reversed was a case that we worked on. Kerry Robinson out of Georgia. He was convicted with DNA evidence, and we showed that the DNA evidence in that case was bad. One thing I would point out is DNA is very, very good at telling us who might have been the original source of some biological material. It is absolutely, not good at telling us how material got somewhere. So if I, lend you my glove, you can leave my DNA somewhere. You need more than just the identification.
Dr. Hampikian adds that it is a difficult process. Typically, a genealogist is needed to sort through records and newspapers and assist police in finding out, who is alive, where people are, who might be around. And if these reports are true, Bryan, that genetics played a significant role in this, in Kohberger's arrest, Hampikian is confident that this is the process and how they did it.
It's fascinating to me. It's outside of my understanding completely, but I get it. I can follow the process a little bit. But that proving or disproving that DNA is what the system he used to show that Amanda Knox was not guilty, said that DNA was tainted. There was something wrong with it. So it goes both ways, as you said. Is it reliable? Sure. But what does it tell you? That depends on what you're looking for.
Yeah, it can be very effective, but he used another analogy with me. If take someone's toothbrush, you could put their DNA wherever you want at that point, and it might accidentally be transferred one way or another. So again, it shows you who's the original source of this biological material. And if it turns out to be true from these national reports, what we're hearing, it seems that is how Kohberger could be connected to this. And
hopefully by tomorrow, with the release of the unsealing of that probable cause affidavit, we'll have a better understanding. Maybe that DNA did play a big part. Thank you very much, Andrew. There's a big job opening at the U.S. House of Representatives. While you don't technically have to be a member of Congress to earn that spot, certain members of Congress are preventing anyone from being named Speaker of the House. But for Idaho's delegates, it's just business as usual. Thoughts on that story or any other story we've talked about so far on the 208? Or maybe you have other ideas. Text us. That number, 208-321-5614. We take your questions, your comments, and even your complaints. Just keep them clean. Don't forget to include your name in the hashtag the 208. Oh, and stay tuned. Your text could be shared at the end of the show. Okay, so we talked about this yesterday, but since it has stretched into a second day, let's talk about it again today. For a century, no election for the Speaker of the House went beyond one ballot. For 50 years, in fact, from 1945 to 1995, the ballots for Speaker of the House went directly along party lines. Two party lines, one Republican, one Democrat, each received the full votes of their respective party. So here we are today, day two, 6 ballots later, still no Speaker of the House chosen. A faction of Republicans, a group of about 20 known as the Never Kevins, have kept Representative Kevin McCarthy from getting the majority 218 votes to win the gavel. To help explain this moment in history, Joe Paris sought out the expertise of Boise State's Dr. Charles Hunt.
No member-elect having received the majority of the votes cast, a speaker has not been elected.
It's January 4th, 2023, after 5 p.m. Mountain Time, and there is still no Speaker of the GOP-controlled House in the United States Congress.
It's unprecedented in the modern era. As many folks have been saying already, this kind of thing hasn't happened in about 100 years.
Dr. Charles Hunt is a political expert at Boise State. He focuses on the United States Congress. After 6 rounds of voting, 3 Tuesday,
Speaker has not been elected. A speaker has not been elected. A speaker has not been elected.
Another 3 so far Wednesday, Republicans are stuck on a split that prevents California Representative Kevin McCarthy from being elected as Speaker of the U.S. House. 20 Republicans refuse, instead voting for Representative Byron Donalds from Florida.
It doesn't seem like it is destined to change anytime particularly soon. They're going to try and meet tonight and probably try to hammer something out, but these 20 or so folks seem as steadfast as they possibly could be about the fact that they are really not happy with Kevin McCarthy.
Idaho's representatives in the House, Reps Fulcher and Simpson, both have voted for McCarthy in all rounds of voting so far. The group of 20 voting against McCarthy includes mostly members of the House Freedom Caucus voting bloc. Fulcher is in that Freedom Caucus, but his votes show a difference within the caucus.
He even pointed that out in an interview yesterday, basically saying, look, the Freedom Caucus is not united in this front against McCarthy. But he and Simpson have both sort of stood fast here. And so for me, these members who have continued to vote against McCarthy, they may have various reasons for doing so. Some of them may be thinking about the institution. Some of them may be thinking about re-election and potential primaries. It doesn't seem like Simpson or Fulcher is particularly, keyed in on that front. Maybe they feel they're fairly safe or have some, institutional or ideological objections to the way this process is playing out, or we should say is not playing out.
Dr. Hunt says Idahoans can basically look at Idaho's votes in the House as status quo. The lack of a speaker in the U.S. House is a huge deal, one that prevents actual work from happening there.
The speaker needs to be in place in order for House business to actually happen, and that includes swearing in these new members of Congress and re-swearing in the old members. And so, there's a lot of ways in which this is a preview of coming attractions, right? We've got the debt ceiling fight, we've got, government spending, we've got, all kinds of bills that are going to come up if they ever get sworn in here. And I don't see how, this is just a procedural matter over who's the speaker. What's going to happen when we get to actual legislation?
For now, the American people can only wait and watch.
But these can go on for weeks. These can go on for months. And, for the sake of policymaking in this country, I hope that's not the case. But, this is a real question and a real issue that Republicans need to figure out before they want to accomplish anything with their new majority.
So there's a good chance that they actually have a 7th vote tonight. The United States House is set to get back together at 6 p.m. Mountain Time here tonight. And Brian, from that point, it'll be interesting to find out if any deals were made behind closed doors, because that's really what happens after vote after vote after vote. They get to a point where they realize, okay, well, nothing's going to change here. We better go do some backroom negotiating and see where we go from here. Did that happen over the last few hours? Likely not, but we'll be watching at 6 p.m. And again, nothing can happen in Congress until this issue is resolved. And as Dr. Hunt said, there's nothing preventing this from going on for days or weeks.
And the last time it went for weeks or months was back in 1855 when it went for 133 ballots, and 2 months later they finally had a Speaker of the House. 1923, just 9 ballots. Just 9 ballots. Almost there. We're 2/3 of the way there.
And I just want to say, in this moment in time, there are no members of the United States Congress because the House hasn't been sworn in. So it's almost like, technically, we don't have a government right now.
They're trying to figure it all out. All right, thank you very much, Joe. All right, final moment of the show. We got a question today about the gag order put in place on the trial or upcoming trial, potential trial of Bryan Kohberger, who is the suspect in the killing of 4 University of Idaho students up in Moscow. Is the probable cause affidavit covered by the judge's gag order? Asks Rex and Meridian. No, typically that is part of the public record, and it's what the defendant uses to see what the state has as a case against them. So it could be continued to be sealed or could be redacted in some parts, but for the most part, that would be part of public record and not covered by the gag order. What the gag order does just prevents like lawyers, law enforcement, or anybody involved in the case from talking to the media or the public about it, other than what you hear in the court of law. Are the people against McCarthy pro-Trump or against Trump? How would that play out? Asked Rose Fisher in Twin Falls. Well, from what you've heard from people talking about today, it seems like they are against because some of them, like Lauren Boebert out of Colorado, said Trump should tell McCarthy to stand down and not be part of this anymore. And this one from Dale. Actually, Joe, it's not that we don't have a government. We don't have a Congress, and we cannot tell the difference. It's an excellent point. Many people asking about being paid. How can they vote for somebody if they're not sworn in? That's just how it is. And I don't believe they get paid their first paycheck until they get into February. So it's going to be some time. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.